Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. My name is Peter Englert. I'm one of the co-hosts of this show. I am here with our fantastic producer, Nathan Yoder, and the illustrious, I'm going to go back to those old words. It even dinged as I said it. So, Aaron Mercer. So, yeah, Aaron, how are you today?
That was like a bright idea moment or something. I mean, man, someone's really likes that.
There we go.
I feel like we have a call-in show here or something.
I know. So, anyway, Aaron, today we are brought to you by the Lumavaz Podcast Network. We're also brought to you by Browncroft Community Church. We exist to respond to the questions you don't feel comfortable asking in church. And you just got back from D.C., and we're interviewing someone that's very close to me, Bob Roden, who's from the D.C. area. And I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of fun this episode.
Yeah, wow, cool timing. I'm really glad to have this conversation right after that visit, when we're taping this. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And by the way, Peter, I don't know, maybe we should do a call-in show. We're talking about that.
Oh, maybe.
Can we ever do that?
Sure, why not?
I don't know. We'll think about it.
Well, and before you throw to Bob, I did forget to say the question we're asking is, why do we need more spiritual mothers and fathers? Yeah. So I think that's a great question for Bob. And I don't know, before we throw it to him, do you have any other thoughts?
No, absolutely. I think obviously the idea of mentorship, spiritual mothers and fathers, I think that's something that a lot of people think about, wrestle with, whether it's people who are looking for mentors, or people who are thinking, should I somehow be investing in people around me? What does that even mean? I think that's a really big conversation. So we're so glad to have Bob here with us. And Bob, I know Peter has met you, and I know you and I know some similar people, but we've never met. And I'd love to know more about you and your story, and just give us a little bit of information about yourself, maybe a little bit about your faith journey too.
Oh, it's just great to be with you guys today. What a privilege to be here and to hang out together for a few minutes and talk about spiritual mothers and fathers, which is really an important concept. A very important concept, because it, first of all, it's a nurturing term. People think about bureaucratic terms in the religious world a lot, but people are really looking for something nurturing. And I grew up without a father in my life, because my mother and my stepdad were both killed when I was 2 years old. And so I grew up with a grandmother, and I would ask my grandmother from time to time, where's you mentioned stepdad. What does that mean? She said, well, your dad and your mom divorced when you were a year old, and then your mom married another man, and that's the man that was killed. And so he was your stepdad. And I would say, well, where's my dad? She said, well, he went off to service. It was during the time of World War II. And I said, will I ever see him? She said, maybe someday. And so that's what I grew up with. My grandmother kept me until I was 12 years old. I never saw my dad, but my grandmother was an awesome person. She taught me great things about life. She taught me the 4 respects of life. Respect yourself, respect authority, respect time. Those are things that are just important to go on life with. It's important that you respect yourself first of all, she would say to me. And as she taught me those respects, it helped me as I had to grow up in her home in North Florida.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I think that's kind of the heart of our episode, is just you have this, just really dramatic story. So before we kind of jump in, you and I met because I went in college on this leadership trip. And I was a college student. We hung out and drove all the way around D.C. And you used to say, and you keep saying, you said, your potential is my mission. Help our listeners kind of understand from basically childhood to becoming, an Assemblies of God denominational leader. How did you grow in this passion for mentoring the next generation? Because it seemed to be something that you didn't naturally have. You had to go find it on your own.
That's a little bit of a mystery, I think, even to me at times, Peter. I growing up without a dad, but I had kids around the neighborhood and aunts and uncles who were very very good to me. But because I had people in my life who came in at strategic times, when I became a pastor and then ultimately a denominational leader, I thought, I want to try to pass along some things that people have imparted in my life. And one of my dreams for so many years was to take a group of college students and just spend 3 or 4 days with them and talk about life, hang out together. And that's how you and I met when you were selected from the school where you're attending, and we took this trip down to Washington, D.C., and we're hanging out with the chaplain of the Senate, Barry Black, and at that time, John Ashcroft was Attorney General, and we went to the house where the Stevens House, C Street there, where the International Prayer Breakfast people sort of were emanated from there. And I just wanted you to meet people that could make a difference in your life. And then we went to some churches, and we attended actually Mark Batterson's church, National Community Church, together, hanging out together, eating in restaurants, telling our stories, and saying to every one of you, your potential is my mission. Those were some of the best days I can remember. And I remember you, Peter, from one of those groups, and just it's so awesome to see you today, now in ministry and developing your own leadership style.
That's great to hear. I feel like I should ask some questions about, Peter as a college student. You must have some good stories out over this. Peter's smiling over here. He doesn't want you to tell the stories, but about what questions he might have asked Chaplain Black or something. I don't know. But I am curious, maybe you can get to that, but I'm sure the listeners would like that. But I also, just to back up a little bit, I'm curious, you talked about how you chose to invest in college students. You made that decision. At the very beginning of this conversation, we talked about there's probably people who are looking for spiritual mothers or fathers, looking for mentors. And then there's people who are kind of struggling with, should I be doing that? What did you felt that urge to do that? How did you know that's something you should pursue? I mean, were there any obstacles in your way that I'm sure you've been doing it so long now that it feels like second nature, but when you kind of were at that beginning point, what were some of the obstacles you had to get past to just take the first step towards making a mentorship relationship like that happen?
Well, first of all, I had to find a place to do it if I were going to take college students. So a natural for me was the college where I had served as chairman of the board. So I had we overcome that obstacle. Secondly, you have to, if you're going to take students for 3 or 4 days, you have to have some finances. So I found a foundation that helped finance this venture. I wanted these students to have a good experience, and they thought they were going to be maybe sleeping in a flop house somewhere, I think, but we had a nice hotel and we ate at nice restaurants and had a nice bus to ride in. So overcoming the financial piece. But I think thirdly I thought, what do we do during these 4 days? So I can't really tell you how I came up with the idea of all these various places to go, other than I thought, if from the people I know, who are the people I would want to introduce these students to? And I think the shepherd heart that you have in ministry is you want the best for the people you're serving. When I was pastor, I always said to the congregation, I'm going to invite the best speakers I know to come and minister to you because I want the best for you. I think if you, this is about seeing other people experience the good things that you've experienced in your life. So that was a part of my motivation. And I think I felt so grateful for the opportunities I was given. But where I came from, I should never have been in places where I've been. I've been to the White House several times. And I had a breakfast with President Clinton. Those are experiences that I thought, I want to share these with other people. This is too good to keep to yourself. And that was my motivation, I think, and I didn't think about it in a formal term like being a spiritual father, but that's the way it began to emerge. Here's what I think about spiritual fathering. It's probably the most effective form of discipleship there is today. Mm. It's because you're spending time with people. You're with them. They're watching you live. You're getting to share with them how you do life. That's what mentoring is. Mentoring is sharing your life with other people.
So I want to kind of back up a little bit because, again, I think the tension of this episode is, you're someone that didn't know their father till later on. And I'd encourage all of our listeners to buy your book, Restless to Reconciled. I read it, and you can actually get it on audiobook too. But, Bob, why don't you walk us through from, when you first became a pastor to even, a district superintendent and all the way in between, who were kind of the main figures in your life that you would say in your professional life, these were the spiritual fathers or mothers that really helped me along as I began to kind of grow, in ministry or professionally? Who were, maybe 3 or 4 figures?
Well, of course, the man who led me to Christ, his name is Paul Davis. Paul was the owner of Cadillac Glass Corporation in Florida, in Lantana, Lake Worth, Florida. And he led me to Christ. And the thing about Paul, he was educated. He was a businessman. I mean, he was sort of somebody in life. And I sort of thought growing up that Christian people were just on the margins of life. I didn't think of Christian people as maybe being in the center of life. But here was a man that was kind of in the center of life. And I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. And then I met Ira Stanfill. Ira Stanfill is a noted gospel songwriter. He took me to dinner one night when he heard about my background. I was in college. He took me to dinner one night, bought me the really great steak dinner. And then he told me his story. He had tragedy in his life. And I just was listening with everything inside of me. And then he gave me $20 at the end of the dinner. He said, here's $20, Bob, to help you. He added value to my life for no reason other than he wanted the best for me. That made an impression on me. And I thought, I want to find the best in other people. I want to find the best. I want to do what I can to add value to other people's life. That's what spiritual fathering is about. It's about adding value to other people. So those are 2 people that were really instrumental in sort of setting the tone. As a matter of fact, Ira Stanfill is the person who introduced me to my wife. He did the wedding for us. His wife, Gloria, stood up as my mother in the wedding. Of course, my mother wasn't living. And Gloria stepped in and she said, I'll stand up as your mother. Well, when people do those kind of things for you, I just said, I want to do this kind of stuff for other people. I want other people to experience the value that I have felt by the attention they paid to me. And presence means support. When you are with a person, that they feel your support. The fact that you want to give your time and be with them, and you're doing this for them. Their potential, as you said, Peter, is my mission. Your potential was my mission on these days that we did this. What we called it the innovative leadership experience.
Whether in the relationships you just mentioned with some people playing a very important role in your life, or in the ones, people that you've invested in, like Peter and others, who makes the first move? Does the mentor or the potential mentor, the potential spiritual father or mother, do you make the first move? Do you have to, or do you look for people to ask you questions? And I guess in either case, what's the question you ask to get things started? You mentioned going out to dinner. That seems like a very practical thing to do, but what's it in your experience? Who acts first, and what do you ask?
I think the person who is, quote, the spiritual father makes the first move. That's been the case in my life. The people in my life, they came to me and they would say, like Ira Stanfield, he said, I want to take you to dinner. And he made the move, and that developed a relationship. And so I made the move to be with these students and do this innovative leadership experience. Now, once you make that move, then the people that you're with have to receive it. That they have to say, okay, I want to do this. And it was, when we got together with these 10 students, it was after about an hour of just kind of hanging out together, you could feel the chemistry starting to happen. Them saying, hey, this is going to be pretty cool. I really want to do this. And I mean, now here we are, how many years later? What, 25 years later, Peter? No, it's not that long. How long has it been since we?
I think it's been 14 years, but 25, 14
years. Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, whatever. But 14 years ago, we met each other for the first time. And here's what's interesting. Though I started this relationship about 2 or 3 months ago, Peter sends me a text one morning out of the blue. Said, hey, I've been thinking about you. I mean, we haven't contacted each other for a few years now. He said, I've just been thinking about you. I responded back to him and said, oh, it's awesome to hear from you, Peter. I remember you. And so we start this conversation again, and it's about that time I'm getting ready to do a website, and I'm thinking about doing podcasts. And Peter says, wow, this is amazing timing. I'm doing a podcast. I know about those things. So, I mean, while I started this, the person who receives it has to also want to receive that, and they have to follow up on it as well.
Wow. So something that I kind of want to help our listeners kind of know, just kind of a little bit of the concreteness of your story, but then it kind of leads me to a question. So probably the 2 places that you served the longest was you were the founding pastor of West End Assembly, which is in Richmond, Virginia. And then you were, depending on what denomination you're from, you were a district superintendent of the Potomac District of the Assemblies of God. And you had like national, so that's kind of like a presbyter or bishop or something like that. So I guess what I'm curious is, obviously Aaron and I are not as experienced as you. Was there a point that you said, I have to move from looking for older leaders to help me to now I am the mentor leader? Like, was there a point that you remember that you made that shift? Or were you doing both at the same time? I guess I'd be curious about kind of how you kind of came about that process.
That's just a key question, Peter, because I well remember what happened. I was pastoring in Richmond. The church was growing, and I was really busy with pastoring, and I really wasn't paying a lot of attention to other people around me at that time because I was consumed with just trying to pastor this church. And there were monthly meetings of ministers in the tribe that I was in, and I didn't go to some of those because I thought, well, I don't have time. And one day I was sitting in my office, and it was a day for one of those meetings. And I'm sitting there saying, should I go or shouldn't I go? And in my heart, I feel like I had one of those Kairos moments where God said to me, not audibly, but just in my heart, if you'll go and share with other people what you're doing, and let me take care of the rest. I got up, I drove to a meeting that was 2 hours away, and I went in and I sat down and I knew some of the people there. That was a turning point. That's when I began to really say, hey, all this has been given to me, I want to give to other people. And from that point on, what I talked about a little bit ago about making efforts to do this, that was the day it changed for me. So I would just urge any of my friends that are even listening today, hey, take that moment and say, you know what? If God has put his hand on my life, I want to pass this along to other people. It's something that I can do. And you don't have to be perfect to be a spiritual father or mentor. You just have to be willing. People aren't looking for perfect people. They're looking for people who will come along beside them and say, let me just share what God's been doing in my life. And that was the turning point for me.
So I know this might be a side note here, but can you just explain a Kairos moment? What that mean? What you mean by that?
Sure. Well, there are two terms in the Greek language for time. One of them is chronos, which is the orderly sequence of events. Like right now, it is whatever, it's 20:12 or 2:30 or what time. That's chronos. Kairos is a special moment in time where that it's a significant moment that makes a difference in our lives. That's what Kairos means when we talk about a Kairos moment. So that's the other word for time. It's a timely experience in your life. That's what Kairos means.
That's cool. Thank you for going into that a little bit. So I love what you've shared. I'm curious. I think a lot of listeners to this podcast, there's a variety of people who listen, but I think there's a lot who may be in the earlier end of their career journey, or their life journey, not just career journey. But let's say there's somebody who feels like they're looking for, they want some wisdom spoken into their lives, but nobody's reaching out right now. Like, what advice do you have for someone like that who, should they be reaching out to people? Should they be, what places should they be looking in? What's your advice for someone like that?
I think ask someone. Give me an example. Last Wednesday night, I was at a church, and I was just hanging out at the Welcome Center, and a younger man came up to me, and he said, I don't know you, but I know you're Pastor Roden. And I said, hi, and we started talking. And he said, I'm taking a class to do my credentials. And one of the things that we have to have is we have to have 4 sessions with a mentor. Could I be bold enough to ask you if you would do that for me? I mean, how could I say no? I mean, how could you say no? And I said, what is it about? He says 4 hours over the next 4 months, 1 hour each month. And I said, sure, I'll do it. I mean, do I have all kinds of extra time to do that? Absolutely not. But I'm going to make time. I'm going to make time to be with that young man because he took the initiative. I mean, you could tell he was nervous. He was kind of, so I would just say, if you want someone to be with you, take a bold step. I mean, you've got one of two choices. They can either say yes or no. And so, I mean, it's not a huge options here. You say so. I would say find somebody that you want to talk with and ask them. Say, would you be willing to just spend some time with me? Now, let me go another step. When I was superintendent, there was a church plant that was starting in another state, and as I was retiring, I was going down to this place, and I went and met a young man who was planting a church. I initiated this. I called him and said, "Hey, I want to bring something to you." Well, he happened to know, we were talking about Mark Batterson earlier. He happened to have met Mark Batterson, and Mark Batterson is the one who told me about this young man. I called him, and he wasn't sure about he's wondering, what are you coming? What do you want to do with me? I said, I'm here to give you some money, and I'm here to tell you I want to pray for you and encourage you. That person has just celebrated 15 years as a pastor in that city. The church has grown to be very large, and we talk regularly on the phone, We have developed a mentoring relationship. So in that case, I started it. In the other case, Wednesday night, this person comes up to me. So it works both ways. Mm-hmm. And you just have to be willing to take a risk. Take a risk and ask somebody to be with you.
Wow. So a question, because you and I have been, ever since that text, you and I have been kind of corresponding. So one of the things that, I wonder if our listeners are wondering, you had mentioned that, your mom and your stepdad passed away. You didn't really know your dad, and you're married to your wife, Joan. She's wonderful, and you have 3 wonderful kids. And I guess some of our listeners might be wondering, was it a struggle for you to learn how to be a dad, or how to be a mentor or parent? When you think about your 3 kids, what did you struggle with, and what did you maybe came a little natural to you, especially with parent, since you didn't have those natural relationships? And obviously you spoke very highly of your grandma. You had some aunts and uncles that really stepped in there, but how did you feel like you parented differently, and maybe what was the same?
Well, maybe there's a little bit of should give a little of the backstory. When I was 15 years old, I met a man in the hospital. My uncle took me, who was allegedly my father. And he was introduced as my father because I had the same last name. And he said he was going to come and be with me sometime, but I never heard from him. It was I always say the letter never came, the phone never rang. He never got in touch with me. And so when I married Joan, I told her my story, that my parents, my stepfather and my mother were killed, that I met this man when I was 15 who was allegedly my dad, and he's never got any contact with me. Well, after we got married, she said, there's got to be more to this story, Bob. There's got to be more to this story. And so we went to visit some relatives, and I learned that the man that I met when I was 15 was not really my dad. He married my mom to give me a name. And I asked my aunt, well, who is my dad? She said, your dad is a man named Drew Strickland. And I said, where is he? She said, he died when he was 30 years old. So here are 3 men in my life. 2 of them were dead, and the man that's still alive was only a man who gave me a name. So with that background, my idea of fatherhood was, I just didn't have a whole lot of idea what it meant to have a father. So when we had children, I did struggle to try to, be a father. What do you do? And I neglected our children in the very early days of their life more than I should have. Not because I didn't love them, but I'm just busy doing stuff, and I'm not thinking about how much it's important for a father to be with their children. And one night I had a dream, and I woke up out of this dream crying. And Joan said to me, "What's wrong? What's happening?" I said, "Oh, Joan, I just had the most awful dream. I dreamed I was coming out of the church, last one out of the church, and there's this young man on the lawn, and he was smoking marijuana because I could smell it in my dream. And I said to him, 'Hey, you probably ought to go somewhere else to do that.' And the young man said to me in the dream, 'You don't recognize me, do you? I'm your son, Rob.' And so I woke up out of this dream crying and realizing that I had been neglecting our children. And I said to Joan, I have to make some changes. So I started, that time I started getting some books to read about fathering. I even talked to our children. They were younger. And I said, I love you, and I'm learning how to be a dad. And I started coaching. Our son was just starting baseball about that time. I started coaching the baseball team. I coached the football team that he was on. At every activity at school that the girls were in, I would go, and like if they were musicals, I would write it on my calendar this night, and I would say to people, I have an appointment. It's a very important appointment. And I gave it a priority, because when you communicate to your children, presence means support. So I was having to learn how to be a father. And then I read a book that said, why don't you bless your children at night before they go to sleep? And so I started going in at night when our kids would go to bed. I put my hand on their forehead and I would say, as you go to sleep tonight, I bless you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we even developed a sleeping pill verse. If they couldn't sleep at night, we'd give them Psalm 4:8. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. And that became their sleeping pill verse. So they couldn't sleep, I'd go in and say, let me give you your sleeping pill verse. So I just learned, though I was like any father. I wasn't a perfect father. I had so many flaws. But I was communicating with our children that I'm learning how to be a father to you. And that was a very, very important piece. I'm grateful to say today that all three of our children grew up. They're followers of Jesus. And not because we did it right, but because we invested in their lives. And that was a major turning point. That dream I had was a major turning point. And in learning how, I said, I have to learn how to be a father. And probably that's what has motivated me some to want to reach out to other people to try to help them to learn what it means to really be a father.
I love how you're reminding us that, how important it is to make sure that being a spiritual father and mother, that means first and foremost the people in your own family, people in your kids. I think that probably, Peter, I'm going to speak for you, but I'm guessing that resonates with both of us. That's so important. So thank you so much for saying that. And you, at the very end of what you just said, you were talking about how that's helped you when you're trying to invest in other people's lives also. And, is there one, I mean, it doesn't have to be one thing, but if there's one thing, is there one thing that you've learned as being a spiritual father to your children, the most important spiritual fatherhood you have, but is there something you've learned as you've tried to invest, something you've applied to other relationships, other situations where you're investing in someone, whether it's someone like Peter or it's someone else who God has put into your life? What's one lesson you've learned from being a spiritual father to your kids, reaching out to someone else?
I think it's important that, and for me as a pastor, that my public life and my private life matched up. That's what integrity is. That what they saw in the pulpit was what they saw at home. That I didn't have one voice or say one thing in the pulpit, but do something different at home. And I was openly, I said to them, I'm learning that to do that, you have to have conversation. You have to listen. You have to pay attention. I told Rob about the dream I had, and I told our other kids as well. But I told Rob, I said, I just need to change some things here, and it's amazing when you are. See, transparency disarms people. When you're transparent. You don't have any walls. So I think I'd say being transparent is really, really important as a father. Now, you have to remain the parent. The child is not the parent. You're always the parent. But you see, you operate out of relationship, not just because of rules. We have to have boundaries and rules, but relationship is the absolute priority.
I want to come back to some of those points, but there's something that you've brought up in your story that I actually think is kind of super practical for our listeners. And so I want to just shift the focus a little bit. So, Bob, you've talked about, here you are, a kid from Florida, and all of a sudden you live in Washington, D.C., in that area in Virginia. And you're sitting down and you're having breakfast with Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton. And I think for some of our listeners, there's this shell shockness or imposter syndrome. When I sit down with people or figures, whether it's the mayor or whether it's a CEO or so I guess I want to get super practical for someone that sat with a bunch of people that were in high power positions or were famous or popular. How would you encourage maybe someone that's 25 or 26? What does that conversation look like if you get that opportunity, and how do you make the most of it? What have you learned from your experience with individuals that, you talked about Ira Stanfill. Some of our listeners will know that, others of them are going to Google that. But, how would you coach them to approach some of those situations? Because like what you said, they could be Kairos moments. What would you say to them?
Well, if you find yourself in a situation with, particularly with a strong leader, like a mayor of a city or someone, everyone who comes to them are coming to ask for something. They want something from that person. If you come with the attitude, I'm coming to give you something, and you say to them, I'm here because I'm grateful that you're in a place of leadership, and I want you to know that I pray for you. And I want you to know if I'm here to know, for you to know that. That's my only reason. How can I help you to be a better leader? I had the privilege of meeting President Reagan. I was at a banquet and got my picture taken with him. And when I shook his hand and I said, thank you, President Reagan, I want you to know I pray for you. God bless you. I think, anyway, these people are individuals who they need encouragement. They need people to pray for them. And that's our role, is to pray for them. It's not a political agenda. It is here to say my role is a spiritual agenda. I'm here to pray for you. You get. I've never had anyone say, no, don't pray for me. They may say no on some other things, but no one has ever said, no, don't pray for me. But people can use prayer. They need help in what they're doing.
Huh. Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Peter.
Well, let me.
Okay, Peter's got another question. He's going to follow up before I jump into mine.
Well, so like one of the things that you're working on, and we have a mutual friend, Bob Farlow, who's helping you kind of write some blog posts, create some more content. We'll send everybody to your site. So, you talked about, you shook hands with Bill Clinton and you've talked with Ronald Reagan, and I'm glad to have Aaron here. He might add some follow-up questions. So I want to take it a little different direction because we're having fun. So first of all, when I went to...
You got to watch out now. If Peter starts trying to have fun, it could get interesting here.
So, Aaron worked in D.C., and when I went to the Innovative Leadership, one of the things that stood out to me was even back 14 years ago, things aren't as polarized as I thought. Now, it's different there now. I guess as someone that's lived in the Beltway, that's met all these individuals, and it seems like it's more polarized, and someone that's focused on hope, what would you say to people that are cynical about just, people getting along, different parties and things like that? I'm sure you've had a ton of questions from the people that you serve, about Washington, D.C. and America. What are some of your thoughts about the polarization and maybe hope, in the future?
Well, I think our role is we're called to pray for those who are in leadership over us, and to be careful what we say. I think our conversation needs to not be so vitriolic. We need to portray as individuals that we're people who want peace and understanding, and that when you think about Jesus, even when he was hanging out with people that were publicans and sinners and tax collectors, he was hanging out with them not because he wanted to be like them, but because he wanted to show them a better way. And I think hope is showing people a better way. That when you can say to people, "Hey, we don't have to live like this. We can have a better way," and that we also understand that the political system in any country is not the answer, the ultimate answer. We need political systems, we need government, but the ultimate answer is what happens in the inside when people's hearts are affected and changed. And I think that's why it's so important for the church to not lose its way and feel like it has to take on a political approach. We live in this world, but as Jesus said, while we live in the world, we are citizens of another kingdom. And that kingdom is righteousness and peace and joy. The scriptures tell us that. And when you watch it, Jesus lived in this kingdom here. He lived on this earth with tension just like we have. I mean, the Roman government and the Jewish people were in tension all the time. And he said, I can't fix all that. But what I came to do is to help people's hearts change and to see how the difference is. So that's my approach to helping people understand is people watch how we live. I want to go back and say two things about President Clinton and President Reagan. You know, I don't want to imply that I'm friends with those people or hanging out with them. I was at a breakfast table with President Clinton and got invited there because of my because I was a religious leader. And it was wonderful. He asked me to pray, and I have a card signed by him, and President Reagan, somebody else got me there. But it's, you know, when you're in Washington, D.C. and you're in circles, you will bump into you bump into all kind of people. And when you do, I think you say, God, help me at this moment to make a difference, to represent your kingdom in a way that people will understand that we have come to a place of peace in our own heart about who we are. If you're not at peace with yourself, how can you help other people come to peace? You have to be at peace with yourself, and that's very, very important. That's that respect for yourself that my grandmother taught me about as a child. But that peace that comes from God, that comes into our life.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's. Did you want to follow up in that particular? So I wanted to just. I mean, I think what you just said, actually, Peter, what your question was, kind of actually connects well to where I was interested in asking you a question, Bob. Yeah, I mean, whether you're in Washington, Washington D.C., or you're in New York City, you know, you're going to come in contact with some of the with business people or other leaders. You know, someone's wants to go to Nashville, and they're going to talk to or in L.A. or I mean, you know, right here in Rochester, you come in contact with some, particularly in the technology field or health or whatever. But I think you know, that's so key. Who does God put into your circles, or someone who may not even be a leader, someone who's just who needs you to connect with them. I am curious though, like what do you mentioned about touching people's hearts, and you mentioned it in the context of God needs to get through our hearts in the political world for sure. But how do you approach that? Because, you know, getting back to our question here of why do we need more spiritual mothers and fathers, there might be people who don't think they need extra wisdom in their life, or resistant to that. You know, the idea of I kind of built myself up by my bootstraps, I don't need help. How have you found that you can kind of get through those barriers? Or on the flip side, have you ever felt that and you've had to deal within your own heart to bring that barrier down in your own life? I don't know. I'm curious. Just I'd love to hear your thoughts and your wisdom on that.
Well, I think you have to point people have to feel that they're not an agenda or a target from you. And sometimes in the church, we sort of feel like we're targeting, or we are, you know, people are we're marketing people. This is about connecting with people. It's connecting with them at a level that you care about them, and people feel that they can sense that. One day I was in the Capitol building, And Peter, I don't remember if this was the group that you were in, because we had 4 or 5 of these groups that went to D.C. And we came around the corner, and it's a time when Hillary Clinton was the senator of New York, and she walked around the corner, and boom, there she was. And I just reached out my hand and I said, Senator Clinton, it's so nice to see you again. Thank you for what you do, and God bless you. It was, I mean, I thought she may never remember that, but I thought if I could just plant a seed of peace and hope in a person's life, might make a difference in her. What is interesting, I did see her at another time then at a banquet, and I watched her and a group of people join hands and say a prayer. So, there are ways that we can, if we see our influence as spiritual and not political. So our influence is a spiritual influence, not a political influence. And I think that's a mistake that the church can make by trying to exert political influence. What we do will bring about influence, but our goal is to help people find the peace of God in their life. So I think that's what we do. For me, there was a time when I was pastoring the church. I'll be very specific. It was a time when Pat Robertson decided he was going to run for president. And here I'm this young pastor, and people came to me, and we had a successful church, and they said, hey, we're going to have a rally over here, and we're going to kind of promote Pat Robertson for president. And so I went to the rally, and they asked me to be a part of the leadership of that, and I was in there hoorahing away. And later on, I thought, hey, if I wouldn't do that today, I wouldn't do that today. I would say that, hey, I'll pray for him. I'll do everything I can to ask for God's will in people's lives. But I'm not going to go out and I mean, because, when you pastor a church, you have both Democrats and Republicans in your church, and you have independents. And if you take sides with any of them, you're polarizing rather than unifying. And the thing that Paul consistently contends for in the church is unity in the church. And that's one of the things I really admire about Mark Batterson in D.C. I mean, he has all kinds of people in his church, but Mark is a person that always talks about praying for people and loving them and caring about them. He's a great example of a person, I think, who, if you want to look at an example of how to pastor a church in a very political, polarized situation, look at National Community Church, where Mark Batterson's the pastor. He's a great example.
Well, 2 more questions, and because Aaron's a friend with Mark, Mark, you're welcome on the podcast at any time. So Bob, thanks for throwing that out there. So we'll have some fun with that. So the last 2 questions, this one question that I feel like it's important to ask. So no surprise, the 3 of us are men here. So I'd love for you to talk about spiritual mothers, in 2 ways. So number 1, in your life, some of the most influential people were a type of spiritual mother. And maybe what's the difference between a spiritual mother and a spiritual father, especially if you're a different gender, but also, just to kind of speak to women, because I think that sometimes, I think men and women both face this, but I don't feel like I'm good enough. I don't feel like I have anything to offer. And just maybe in conversations with your wife, even how she spiritually mothers. So first of all, talk about the influential women in your life, but then secondly, speak to the spiritual mothers out there, or maybe to women that are looking for spiritual mothers.
Yeah. Well, the Bible is pretty clear on this about the matriarchal aspect of our faith. It's interesting that when Paul's writing to the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, he says, we cared for you like a mother caring for her children. So that there's the comparison of the caring aspect. I think mothers have a special gift in the caring, comforting piece. And then I noticed this morning, I was reading in Romans chapter 16, where Paul is listing all those people. He says, and say hello to Rufus and to Rufus's mother, who was also like a mother to me. Even the Apostle Paul had a person who was like a mother to him. And so I think that aspect of the caring, warm aspect that a mother brings. My grandmother is a great example for me. I mean, there was nothing like crawling up in my grandmother's lap and having her tell me, hey, Bobby, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We're going to make it. I mean, that tender care, I think that's a good word, tenderness. There's a tenderness in mothers that I believe we recognize. That's very important. So spiritual mothers carry a very important piece in helping people along the way. So it's important to have spiritual fathers, but I'm so glad you brought up spiritual mothers, because that was a part of our topic. And if you look at people in life, they can tell you about some grandmother who prayed for them, or some person maybe a mother who cared for them. My mother-in-law was such a person. One of her children was having some struggles in life, and my mother-in-law used to go at night and put her hand on the bedroom door and say, God, would you take care of my daughter? Please take care of my daughter. I mean, a mother crying out to God like that for their children is a powerful, powerful example of what they can do. So I would underscore, capitalize spiritual mothers because of how important they are.
Man, what a great place to end. And I guess now we have one of our conversations recorded. This is like when you and I getting on the phone, just a couple thousand people listening. How does that sound?
Oh, this has been so great, Aaron, to meet you today. And I want to thank both of you for giving me this privilege of hanging out with you for these minutes. And wow, it's gone by so quickly.
Yeah.
And my prayer is that God will use this in some way to make a difference in somebody's life. Somebody's life.
Well, we close with a question, and the great thing, Bob, with your experience, you're used to cleaning up messes. So Aaron and I are going to answer the question, what does Jesus have to say about it? And whatever's messed up, you can kind of fix. Does that sound good?
It sounds good. That's pressure.
Well, I'm sure as a pastor and a denominational leader, I mean, you've never had to clean up any messes, I'm sure, right?
Just one or two.
You're one or two, right? Okay.
So who's going first, me or you?
How about I'll go and then you can just perceive it. I think that's a good.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, to me, this is why do we need more spiritual fathers and mothers and fathers? And by the way, I'm glad you asked the mothers question too. I think it's a really important topic, and I think Jesus wants us to have people who are speaking into our lives. I mean, he made us as a church with people who are at all different places in their spiritual journeys. Certainly age journey, but even probably more important is even the spiritual journey. And there's things that we can teach each other along the way. And that, I think that includes the mothers and fathers teaching those who are younger in the faith. And I think there's probably, I mean, as a father myself, I know there's a father of my kids. I know there are things that I learned by just hearing the questions my kids ask sometimes that I need to get kind of reminded of. So I think it's very important, and it's a reason why God put us in a relationship. So Peter, go ahead.
Love it. So Luke 2:52 says that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. And if you take that verse and you begin to wonder, how did he grow in favor with God and man? How did he grow physically, spiritually? Well, I mean, the biblical writers take time to tell the story of Joseph, his father, and then takes even more time to tell the story of Mary, his mother. So Jesus had a mom and a dad that invested in him as he walked this earth. And then I think about Jesus's ministry. You know, he devotes his life to 12 disciples, but then he has additional people like Mary and Martha. And, you know, as we read the story of the unfolding of the New Testament and the gospel, these individuals became spiritual mothers and fathers. And, you know, the fact that we're here today and we're still talking about Jesus 2,000 years later is because there's a lot of quiet work that happens outside of podcasts or outside of sermons on Sunday morning of individuals that are doing one-on-ones, discipling, mentoring, however you want to define it. So, you know, I think Jesus modeled it by receiving it, but he also modeled it by giving it. And I mean, that's kind of what's becoming apparent in this conversation. Bob, what would you add to that?
I think those are excellent insights that you've just given as we wind up here today. I would also add that, you know, spiritual mothering and fathering you have it as a casual experience. It just sort of happens in life as you're going along with people. And then you have more intentional times, like the few days we spent together, Peter. And you need both of those. You can't live like we did those 3 or 4 days together. That can't be the way life is. That was a special, that was a Kairos days. But then I think just having the attitude in everyday experience, hey, wherever I go, whatever I do, I'm going to try to be a spiritual mother or father to people it's an attitude that we have. I think that's what's important.
Wow. So, Bob, you have 2 books that I highly recommend. Restless to Reconcile, that's your story. But then you also have 4 Faces of a Leader. Where's the best place for people to find you? What's your website address?
If you go to www.bobroden.com, and you'll find all the information there. I'd love to have our listeners today go and check it out, and we'll be adding to it as we're going along. We've just opened the website recently, and we just posted some new stuff. I was at a conference with Dick Foth and John Ashcroft last week in Georgia, and that's going to be on the website. So that's the best place to go.
My favorite thing that you said about that is you're like, well, between the 3 of us, there's 160 years of leadership experience. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, and we actually it's 240. We need to make it, we're each 80 years old. So 3 times 8 is 24, 240 years, and we compressed it into 2 days. Pretty amazing.
Well, there you go. Well, the best place to find us is go to whygodwhypodcast.com, click the subscribe button. You'll be able to access this episode and many others. Thank you so much for joining us today.